The room smelled wrong. Not unfamiliar, just wrong. Like a place that had been rearranged while I was gone, not physically but quietly. Like someone had made a decision in my absence and never planned to explain it. The light through the window cut across the mattress at a strange angle, hesitant, unsure where it was allowed to land. Even the sun seemed to pause. Something was breathing. Slow. Heavy. Confident. I stood frozen in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame to steady myself. Not because my legs were weak, but because the room no longer recognized me. Or worse, it did. My eyes adjusted, and there it was. A golden retriever. Fully stretched across my bed. Not curled. Not resting. Claiming it. Her body rose and fell with soft, satisfied sighs. One paw lay exactly where my hand used to rest and sleep, as if she had learned the shape of me by accident. My pillow had been pushed to the floor, bent and creased like something that had already served its purpose. My bed. For a moment, my mind refused to name what my eyes were seeing. Shock protected me by slowing time, stretching seconds into something survivable. I could hear my own breath, shallow and careful, as if I were the guest here. Footsteps approached behind me. "Mom," a voice said casually, too casually. "Don't wake her." I turned. My son stood in the hallway, arms crossed, leaning slightly into the frame as if this conversation had already ended. His face held no apology, no hesitation, only comfort. "She needs the softer mattress," he added. "She's old." Old. The word didn't strike me all at once. It settled. Chose a place. And it stayed. I nodded, not agreement, just instinct. Speaking would have required energy I suddenly understood I wasn't meant to use here. Words invite negotiation, and this wasn't a discussion. This was an arrangement. I stepped back into the hallway. No one followed. Further down, a door stood open. The laundry room. Bright. Narrow. Functional. A folding cot leaned against the wall like an afterthought that had been carefully measured. "This will do," the room seemed to say. I sat down slowly. The dryer hummed beside me, steady and indifferent, tumbling clothes that no longer felt like mine. Laughter drifted from another room. Life continued, uninterrupted. And that was when it happened. Not anger. Not grief. Understanding. Disrespect doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shout or slam doors. It rearranges your place so quietly that by the time you notice, everyone else has already adjusted. As the lights went out down the hall, one thought anchored itself inside me, sharp and unmistakable. If they could move me out of my bed without asking. How long had I already been sleeping somewhere I didn't belong? The house didn't change overnight. That's what made it so dangerous. If it had happened all at once, if someone had shouted, demanded, taken, I might have resisted. People recognize theft when it's loud. But what happened to me was quiet, polite, reasonable. The kind of loss you thank people for. First, I told myself it was temporary. Everything was temporary. That word became my lullaby. They moved in with suitcases and apologies, promises folded neatly between them like spare clothes. "Just a little while, Mom. Just until we get back on our feet." I nodded the way mothers do, the way women who've survived worse convince themselves this will pass too. The guest room went first. I washed the sheets myself. Placed fresh flowers on the nightstand. I wanted them to feel welcome, wanted to prove I wasn't a burden yet. Sharon smiled that tight smile of hers and said the room was cozy. The way people do when they're already planning improvements. A few weeks later, the office followed. The children needed space, they said. Just for now. My papers, my sewing kit, my husband's notebooks, all boxed and stacked in the attic. "You don't use these much anymore, right?" I told myself they were right. I told myself I'd retrieve them later. Later is where things disappear. The den became a playroom. Toys spread across the floor like evidence of a life that was expanding while mine contracted. I learned to step carefully, to lift my feet higher than necessary, to apologize when I tripped over things that hadn't been there before. Furniture moved without conversation. One afternoon, my chair, the one by the window, was gone. Sharon said it made the room feel crowded. She said it gently, as if explaining something to a child. I stood there nodding while a hollow opened beneath my ribs. The kitchen changed next. Cabinets reorganized. My mugs placed higher. Spices I used pushed to the back. Sharon called it efficiency. She patted my hand and said, It's better this way. Better is a word people use when they don't mean fair. Dinner became an exercise in timing. I learned when to speak and when not to. When my stories slowed the table, my son's jaw tightened. When I mentioned the past, Sharon's eyes drifted away, already bored. "Can we stay on topic?" he said once. Topic? As if my life were a tangent. I noticed how easily my voice disappeared into the room, how conversation continued without me like water flowing around a stone. They didn't silence me. That would have required intention. They simply stopped noticing when I spoke. And the strangest part? I helped them do it. I made myself smaller so things would run smoothly. I folded myself into corners because corners feel safe when you're afraid of conflict. I mistook peace for self-erasure. By the time I found my bed replaced, the house had already trained me to accept it. Still something lingered. An unease I couldn't name. A sense that the walls remembered me even if the people didn't. That the house itself knew something was wrong. That night, lying on the cot beside the dryer, listening to someone else's laundry tumble through my life, one question kept circling my thoughts. If space could be taken so quietly, what else had I already given away without realizing it? And was there anything left to take back? They would later say it was about the dog. That Daisy was old. That she needed comfort. That animals don't understand boundaries the way people do. It was a convenient explanation. Clean. Defensible. Something that could be repeated to friends without embarrassment. But Daisy was never the problem. She had been mine long before she became theirs. A gift from my husband on a birthday I barely wanted to celebrate. Every woman deserves one creature who loves her without conditions, he'd said. Daisy fulfilled that promise faithfully. She followed me from room to room, rested her chin on my knee while I read, pressed close at night when the house felt too quiet after grief moved in. After my son and his family arrived, Daisy changed, not in loyalty but in assignment. Sharon began walking her, then feeding her, then correcting the way I spoke to her. "You spoil her," she'd say lightly, like a joke that wasn't meant to be laughed at. "She needs structure." Structure became another word I learned to fear. The children fed Daisy scraps under the table, laughing when she wagged her tail. Michael complained about allergies, but only when Daisy sat beside me. Gradually, she stopped sleeping in my room. At first, I told myself it was noise, youth, excitement, things I could no longer offer. Acceptance is easier than grief. But Daisy still found me when she could. When voices got loud. When tension filled the air. She'd slip into the laundry room and lie beside the cot, her body a quiet apology for a world that had decided I needed less. One afternoon, winter sun pale and thin, I sat on the porch steps to rest my knees. Daisy followed and nudged her head under my arm. A familiar gesture that pulled something loose in my chest. For a moment, I wasn't invisible. Then my son's voice cut through the stillness. "Daisy, leave Mom alone. She doesn't need the fuss." Not concern. Command. Daisy hesitated, looked at me, then obeyed him. I smiled because smiling had become reflex. But something cracked, tiny, sharp, deliberate. That evening, Sharon mentioned Daisy's behavior, as if it were a problem I had caused. "You confuse her," she said. "Affection isn't always healthy." I didn't argue. I rarely did anymore. When the large dog bed arrived, blue plush, expensive, I felt it before I understood it. Sharon unpacked it carefully, smoothing the fabric with satisfaction. Michael said it would go in my room because it had the most space. Space. The word echoed strangely. By nightfall, my mattress was gone. They spoke of Daisy's comfort as if it outweighed my existence. As if aging meant exchanging dignity for convenience. I looked at Daisy sitting on the bed, ears lowered, confused by the tension in the room. She wasn't triumphant. She was uncertain. That was when I understood. Daisy wasn't replacing me. She was proving something far worse. They no longer saw a difference between what was mine and what was useful to them. That night, Daisy scratched softly at the laundry room door, restless. When I opened it, she lay beside me on the floor, refusing the bed they'd chosen for her. I pressed my forehead to her fur and whispered, "You didn't do this." And in that quiet, something settled inside me. Solid, unmistakable. If even the dog knew where I belonged, why didn't my family? And more importantly, what happens when a woman finally stops accepting the place she's been given? I used to believe generosity was something you pass down. Like recipes. Like manners. Like faith. I believed if I gave enough, love would remain intact. That if I stayed flexible, everyone else would stay kind. It took me too long to understand that generosity, when it meets entitlement, doesn't soften hearts, it trains them. The requests didn't start when they moved in. They started long before that. Small things at first. A late rent payment. A medical bill that couldn't wait. A car repair that somehow became two. Each call came with the same careful tone. Apology layered over expectation. We'll pay you back. I never asked when. I told myself it didn't matter. A mother helps. A widow manages. A woman who has already buried the love of her life doesn't cling tightly to money. But money has memory. It remembers where it goes. And when it stops being appreciated. Once they lived with me, the requests changed shape. Groceries. Gas. School fees. Sharon added items to my list without asking, things I didn't eat, things I couldn't pronounce. When I hesitated, she smiled and said, "You don't want the kids to feel deprived, do you?" Deprived. I slept beside a dryer. Bills began appearing where I couldn't ignore them. Under my teacup. Inside my newspaper. On my pillow, folded like a note that assumed it belonged there. First, I thought it was coincidence. Then I noticed the pattern. Michael approached me one afternoon, rubbing the back of his neck. The card bounced, he said. Just this once. Just this once had been happening for years. What hurt wasn't the money. It was the certainty. The assumption that my resources were communal. That my hesitation required justification. That my silence was consent. I began to notice the imbalance everywhere. They ordered takeout while I ate leftovers. Sharon came home with new shoes while reminding me to watch my spending. They spoke about our budget when they meant mine. One evening, I sat in the laundry room folding towels that weren't mine, listening to laughter float down the hall. Something cold and clear settled in my chest. They had built a life inside my life, and I had helped them do it. Shame came next, not the kind that bends you, but the kind that straightens your spine. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who worked 2 jobs, who handled every bill, who taught her son how to drive, how to stand up straight, how to say thank you. That woman would not recognize the version of me sleeping on a cot. And for the first time, instead of sorrow, I felt resolve. That night, while the house slept, I opened a small metal lockbox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents my husband once walked me through carefully. "So you're never at anyone's mercy," he'd said. The papers were neat, clear, and my name was everywhere. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply breathed, because for the first time in a long while I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. And the people who mistook my silence for weakness had no idea that the quietest woman in the house had begun keeping records, not of money, but of truth. And truth, once documented, has a way of changing everything. The decision didn't arrive with drama. No racing heart. No shaking hands. No sudden bravery. It arrived quietly, like a door closing inside me. One morning, I noticed a stack of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. Bills. Notices. My name printed where consent should have lived. Sharon was on the phone nearby, laughing about weekend plans. Michael paced, complaining about money, about pressure, about how hard things were. They spoke as if I were furniture. Present. Useful. Silent. I picked up one envelope and felt its weight. Not physical, symbolic. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about authority. About who had the right to decide the shape of my life. I didn't argue. I didn't announce anything. I waited. Later that day, when the house emptied, children at school, Sharon out shopping, Michael at work, I packed lightly. My glasses. A sweater my husband once said made me look capable. The small metal lockbox. Calling the taxi felt strange. Like a betrayal of the role I'd been playing. But when the car pulled up, I didn't hesitate. The office I walked into wasn't intimidating. Just quiet. A brass nameplate. A woman with calm eyes who listened without interrupting. "What would you like to do?" she asked. The question stunned me. No one had asked me that in years. "I want my house back," I said. She reviewed the documents carefully. Deed. Ownership. My name. Alone. Uncontested. "You have every right," she said gently. Rights. Another word I'd forgotten. When she slid the papers toward me, I didn't rush. I read every line. I felt the weight of each signature waiting to be placed. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. When I finally signed, my hand was steady. Walking out, the air felt different. Sharper. Cleaner. As if the world had been waiting for me to stand upright again. I didn't go home triumphant. I went home prepared. Because people who take quietly are always shocked when consequences arrive calmly. I woke before sunrise. Purpose does that. The house was still when I placed the envelopes on the kitchen table. One for my son. One for his wife. Each addressed with care, not cruelty. Dignity doesn't require bitterness. I brewed tea not because I wanted it, but because rituals matter. They remind you who you are. Footsteps came down the stairs. Michael reached for the papers absent-mindedly, assuming they were bills. His face changed as he read the header. "Mom?" "Good morning," I said. Sharon appeared next. Her irritation turned to disbelief. "What is this?" "Notice," I replied. "You have 30 days to vacate my home." The room filled with sound, confusion, anger, bargaining. "We're family. You can't do this." "We didn't mean." "I know," I said softly. "That's what made it possible." They spoke over each other. Voices rose. Panic replaced certainty. I didn't raise mine. "You didn't hear me when I was quiet," I said. "So now you'll hear the paper." Silence followed. Not because they agreed, but because they finally understood I wasn't asking. I stepped outside onto the porch. Daisy followed, pressing against my leg. Inside, the house erupted. Drawers slamming, voices breaking, children crying. I listened without guilt. This storm was not mine. For years I endured. Now I stood. And for the first time since my husband died, I felt protected. Not by someone else, but by myself. They left slowly. Boxes first. Then furniture. Then certainty. Each room exhaled as they emptied. The walls seemed to straighten. The house remembered itself. Michael handed me the spare key on the final day. His eyes held something new. Not anger, not blame, recognition. "I didn't realize," he said. "I know," I answered. "You didn't look." When the door closed behind them, the silence that followed was different from any silence I had known before. This one belonged to me. That night I stood in my bedroom, the real one. My mattress restored. My quilt folded back. Daisy climbed up gently and curled near my feet. I sat on the edge of the bed and touched the fabric, grounding myself in the truth. The opening scene finally made sense. It was never about a dog. It was about how easily a woman can be moved out of her own life when she teaches people she'll accept less. I lay down. The bed held me the way it always had. And I understood something clearly, finally. Dignity doesn't disappear. It waits. And when you're ready, it comes back with boundaries. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt yourself shrinking to keep others comfortable, remember this. It is never too late to take your space back. Like this story if it moved you. Subscribe for more deeply human, real-life stories. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your voice matters. And your place in the world is yours to keep.